Welcome to the Dalitalks show. If this is your first time, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Dali. I created this podcast to share information that can help us grow and have some fun, and also to get some resources. So I do talk about my main topic, bullying awareness and prevention, a little bit, but I also talk about other topics that can help you have conversations with your children and family members, right? To create, a sense of more understanding of others, and also to make sure that your kids do not grow up in a bubble, just thinking that their world is what everybody else's world looks like. So I want to share about something that happened several weeks ago. And it has to do with Latinidad or Latinhood and how we see Latinos or Latinx people. So many weeks ago, I saw a video of Gina Rodriguez, who played Jane on the show, Jane the Virgin. And she was speaking with a TV host about the topic of what makes one Latino. And one of the questions that was asked is, what do you think about people who don't speak Spanish? She responded in a way that I agree, like it's nobody's right to tell you how, what makes you Latinx or Latino or Latina, however you identify. Even if whether you speak it or not, or if you speak it but don't speak it the way that others expect to speak it, the point is, like, you are the one who decides how you're going to identify, right? And I've had many rooms on the Clubhouse app under the Amigos club there, where we discussed this very same topic, and unknowingly, the topic hit a lot of sensitive spots, and the conversations always became insightful and super emotional. And this was we started in 2021. And we had that room running for almost an entire year. Every week, we would open it up for an hour. People would come in and share their story. And let me tell you, I had no idea how pervasive it is to be attacked simply because you either don't speak Spanish or don't speak Spanish the way that others want you to speak it. Like any other language, and like in any other country, Spanish has different dialects. And the way that I speak Spanish as a Nicaragüense, as a Nicaraguan, is very different than, the way that people in Spain, people in Chile, and people in Mexico speak it. For the most part, we can understand one another, but there are a lot of like, what does that word mean to you? Oh, that means this to us. Or like, you can accidentally insult somebody using a word that means something completely different to you, but it might be an insult or a bad word or a vulgar word in another area, in another region. So this post that I responded to of Gina Rodriguez talking about that issue received a lot of good, but a lot of bad comments, like a lot of hateful stuff. And it was devastating, because a lot of it came from people who identify as Latinos or as Latinx. And I used the word on my post, on my response to it. I said something to the fact of like, stop telling Latinx people on how to do things, how to be, based off your perceptions of, like, because, we all get fed a certain stereotype about a certain type of people. So my use of the term Latinx pissed off a lot of people. And it's a new term that was created by the LGBTQ plus community, because they don't always identify as male or female. So it became an inclusive term to identify or to refer to people from Latin America, right, of all genders. I'm okay with that, but a lot of people are not. And so some people feel like using words like that is eroding our culture, that it's, just taking away from the original roots of Latinidad. And if you think about it, we all evolve. I mean, Latinos are not what Latinos were, I mean, back in the early 19th century. I mean, or, you know, our language evolves, our foods. And as a matter of fact, I was doing some research about Nicaraguan food, because, you know, I'm Nicaragüense, so I want to know more about my country and the foods and everything. And I was really sad because every time I dug deeper and deeper and deeper about the ingredients we use in certain foods, it stems back to colonialism, you know, the Spaniards coming over to our country, bringing this food or this ingredient, and then that is like what our food derives from. You know, it's a mixture of, you know, Spaniard ingredients with our indigenous ingredients. And it makes me sad because it's like, oh, it's a reminder that we were, you know, forced to do away with some of our original, you know, ingredients and cultural things. But that's who we are today, right? We're just a mixture of all of this that's happened. And so when I think about the animosity that I received for using the term Latinx, makes me think, well, what about the term Hispanic? I never identified as an adult as Hispanic because I learned, you know, the origin of that word. It was created by the census because they did not know how to lump in, you know, people from Latin America. And they take certain things into account about what makes you, you know, from, you know, Latinos or Latinx. And it's crazy because it's not just language. Just because you don't speak Spanish or because you speak Spanish a certain way, that's not what makes you Latino or Latina, Latinx. There's more than that. And I know that we're kind of like that rare geographic, you know, right? Where most people can be identified by the color of their skin, but Latinos cannot, because we come in so many different shades. We look so different. It's not like, you know, we have a like a I don't even know what do you call it, what is it, a pattern. You know, it's not like it's set in stone, like this is what Latinos will always look like. They're always going to have black hair and this shade of brown, or, you know, this type of hair. No, we are so different. So the other thing that I learned from this post is that I mean, I didn't learn it really. It was just a reminder because I see this all the time, but sometimes within our own culture or within our own people, we get a lot of hostility and no support. Instead, we get torn down, right? And it's sad because I see other cultures that stick together so well and support one another, even when they don't like something that's going on. They're like, no, but that's our people. We're going to support them. But that does not happen in Latin American people sometimes. Instead, they criticize because they're so fixed on like, no, we have to keep our culture, or no, we have to preserve this, or whatever it is, right? And it makes me really, really sad. So that Instagram post that I have still up on Instagram, I had to turn off the comments because it got ugly. And I'm not going to create a space where people can cyberbully one another. I mean, this is what I do, right? I try to educate people on not engaging in any type of bullying behaviors, and yet it happens all the time. And at first, the first few comments, there was people who were saying things like, oh, what is this white man's term, Latinx? And I was like, as a matter of fact, it's not a white man's term. It was created by the Latinx community. I mean, by the LGBTQ plus community who identify, you know, as Latin American. But they don't want to identify as male or female. There's other genders. So Latinx it is. Now, a lot of people still do not like this term. As a matter of fact, the majority of people don't really recognize the term, even within Latinos. But you know what? The term Hispanic wasn't recognized at first either. People just got used to it. And even today, some people refuse that term because it is something that the census made. It's the way that they can. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that because and that's a whole nother conversation. But what I wanted to get at too about this whole ordeal that this post made me realize was that we don't talk enough publicly about the trauma that comes with being criticized for not fitting a view that people expect. And for example, the first time I heard a story about like trauma and why a person didn't speak Spanish, but they identified as Latino, was this man who brought us all to tears in that clubhouse room. I remember that he grew up in the US, he said, and he was of Mexican descent. So his family would go back to Mexico every year, and he experienced severe bullying from his own family because of how he spoke Spanish at first. This is common. I see this all the time where like family members will kind of tease you if you don't know your Spanish that well, if you can say your R's very well when you say carro or something like that. Or even because of like, the dialect of Spanish. And in case you don't know, even parts of Latin America, have different dialects and the Spanish varies. So as a little child and into his teens, he felt that he was less than, and he felt outcasted. He felt like he was an outsider. Every time that he'd go visit his family, it's like the less he wanted to be around because he knew what was coming. And then it got to the point to where he became paralyzed and could not physically speak at all around his family members. As an adult, he built up the courage and discipline to learn Spanish really well without his family knowing about it. And he ended up working as an adult at a job where he had to travel to Latin American countries and he had to engage with people. And he did this very, very well. He would land anywhere in Latin America except in Mexico, and he would speak Spanish fluently without a problem, no nervousness or anything. But then he would land in Mexico and he'd be triggered and he just like struggled to speak to his work colleagues, but he especially could not speak Spanish around his family if he bumped into them or he would go visit them since he was in town. And hearing him describe his pain and intense anxiety, it was hard and it was eye-opening. I did not know that this could happen or that this was happening to anybody. And it made me wonder, oh my gosh, how many people are experiencing this? And believe me, I'm leaving out a lot of detail from his story, but it was really heart-wrenching. There was another story from a woman whose white father forbade her to connect to her Mexican mother's cultural roots. She was forbidden to even call herself Mexican or like part Mexican. She grew up wondering about her Mexican culture and trying to pay attention to things that she could learn from, such as like music, the language itself. But of course, when you don't know even the ABCs, it's really hard to learn, and pick up on the Spanish, especially when you're being told, don't listen to it, don't engage with it. I want you to have nothing to do with it. Her father discouraged her from trying to speak it. She was forbidden from taking Spanish classes. She had to take French or German or something else. When the topic of, going to a, let's say like a quinceañera or something related to her culture, she was forbidden. And when we heard this story, she was like, I think in her late 30s or 40s, and she was in tears talking about how she felt like she was not part of her Latinx community. although she knew deep down, like, hey, I am part Mexican, that is part of who I am, but she was forbidden to embrace that side of her. And so she tried taking Spanish lessons and struggled. The older you get, the harder it is, especially if you're not practicing with somebody. And she didn't have anybody to practice with because she grew up surrounded by, a non-Latinx community. So she also carried a lot of fear of what her dad would do to her, because I guess he was very harsh. And he actually was one of those people who believed that the white race was superior to any other race. You hear what I'm saying? So he came from a part of Europe where this was very much accepted, that the white race was superior. So she experienced a lot of rejection when she kind of tried to speak Spanish as she was learning it. And she also mentioned that because she was white passing, she felt like she could not say she was Latina at all. She said, I'm white passing, I don't speak Spanish, I don't know anything about Mexican culture except from what I've seen on TV, and how that depicts, people's cultures very differently than what they really are. So both of these stories were really heart-wrenching. And when I think back of those comments on my post about, oh, those are the no sabo kids, or like, these are just American kids being whitewashed, which is, a term, in case you've never heard it, that's a term that's used to pretty much say, like, you're not learning your culture the way that you should, so you're less than. So that can be very traumatic, very uncomfortable, and that will make some people not want to even try to be in tune with that part of them, right? I remember another man that came into the room and same thing had happened to him. Grew up in a very, very white community that thought very, very little of Latinos. And he said that he thought that Latinos were all this negative stuff, right? All these horrible things that he had heard from his family members and from his own community. And about, immigrants coming and taking over and doing, all the crap that you hear that is false. And he came into the room full of Latinos saying that, right? And all these Latinx people were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you're saying that you're buying into that. You're here with us. You see, all of us are, good people. We have jobs. We're not stealing anybody's job. We're not, like all those stupid stories, debunking them. All he had to do was get to know more people instead of listening to the negative things that he was fed since childhood. So I share all of this to make a point that what you feed your mind with is what you're going to believe. So be careful. Be careful who you're listening to. And always look at all sides of the story, because right now you might be saying, okay, well, I'm listening to you right now. How do I know everything that you're saying is true? Well, go listen to other people. That's how you find out, what's truly there and what's not. That's when you discover that sometimes what you hear is just somebody's perception and opinion of others versus reality. There's not one single culture or race that is perfect. We all have people that suck and people that are amazing. So don't generalize, and have conversations with your children and with your family members. And you know what? When you hear the jokes, I get it that sometimes they are funny, but don't buy into them. They're not a reality. If we were all to do that, then I don't know, we would probably have a more chaotic world. I think it already is chaotic because more and more people are not educating themselves about differences. Instead, they just hear and see these stereotypes in the media. They go with it. And sadly, you end up finding out that you're the fool for believing it through an experience that's going to embarrass you. So no, Spanish is not what makes one Latino. No, being born in a certain Latin American country is not what makes you Latino or Latinx. You can be born in freaking Europe and be a, Latino. You can be born in the United States and you're still Latino. You can be born anywhere, and if you come from Latinx descendants, that's what part of you, that's a part of you. That's part of who you are. So I hope that you've learned something. I hope I didn't ramble off too much. I kind of get tongue-tied when I have these discussions because there's so many thoughts that are going through my head and I can't get them all out at the same time. So anyway, think about this and let me know what you think. If you don't agree, fine, that's cool. Just be respectful. You don't have to post terrible comments, horrible comments. You don't have to be mean. Just, you can say, I really don't understand it, but or you can say, I really don't agree, but I understand your point of view, where you're coming from. That's cool. Let's agree to disagree, like they say, right? So I hope that you learned something from this. If you have your own story about, being outcast, share it with me. I like hearing people's stories because I learn even more. I know what that feels like too, to be outcast from your community because they think that you're not fully authentic. And it's like, shoot, what the heck is authentic now? I mean, I have been told I'm not Nicaragüense enough, or that I don't sound like a Nicaragüense, like a Nicaraguan, because my dialect is not the way that it is in Nicaragua. Of course it's not. I grew up in the United States. And I also don't sound quote unquote Mexican because I am not. I grew up in a Nicaraguan household. So, people are never going to be happy. So just be happy with yourself. And then if you want to identify however it is you want to identify, do it proudly, regardless of what people say. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. Please leave a review and I'd love to hear your comments about this topic. Have a good one.
Hey, did you like that episode? If you did, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you may be listening and write a review. If you want more tips or some behind-the-scenes videos, make sure to follow my mom at Dalitalks on Instagram. You can turn on notifications for her posts and stories as well. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. See you next time.